All right, Michelle, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you on here. First and foremost, to talk about your book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, which is going to be coming out very soon here. You've been diligently working on it. And it's a great story, and you're kind of a girl after my own heart. So I'm excited to be chatting with you on the podcast today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
So first and foremost, like, what made you make this transition? You were a dietitian working in the medical field, and then it seems to me like you kind of started to discover the flaws in the system.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, there's such a long backstory to it, but what it really came down to is I started to lose my own health. I've been a registered dietitian. I became a dietitian in 2009. And even from the time I was a young dietitian, I had many questions about our healthcare system. As a dietetic intern, I'd go into patient rooms with my preceptors, and we'd have people on diabetic diets. And I would ask, like, hey, if people can't metabolize carbohydrates, why are we feeding them so many carbohydrates and then dosing them with insulin? But I was a student, I was young, and I was told, like, oh, well, this is the way it works. This is, you have to have carbohydrates. And as I became a dietitian, there's so much sickness and illness that's caused by the food industry. And the Academy of Nutrition, which used to be called the American Dietetics Association, which is the governing board of all dietitians, is sponsored by PepsiCo, GlaxoSmithKline, Frito-Lay, all these things that there's this huge conflict of interest. And so what I found was, people are just not getting better. They're following the guidelines. They're trying to eat fruits and vegetables, and they're just, people are getting sick. And so there was just this profound disconnect. But I always thought that I could really help it from within, right? Like maybe I can reach patients and get to patients. But back, gosh, a little over 16 months ago, I actually really started to become pretty sick myself. I've been a very high carbohydrate athlete my entire life. I've qualified for Boston 12 times. I'm a marathon runner. And it wasn't until that point that I really, switched what I ate. And that kind of led me down to not being able to continue in the dietetics industry.
Wow. So that's pretty powerful. And that's something that I find is really prevalent in the healthcare industry in particular. I mean, we can go down so many avenues here, but first of all, so many people that are giving people advice on how to eat and how to live and how to do these things are super sick themselves. And I mean, you look at these doctors, they're extremely overweight, yet they're giving people advice and they're sick and they're taking every cholesterol, blood pressure, metformin, you name it themselves, yet they're giving people advice. And to me, that is a big red flag right there. But then you incorporate, like you said, all these people that are funding the nutritional education and the nutritional information that have outside interest.
Absolutely. What they're really trying to buy, because I've had people tell me, like, well, just because we're sponsored by PepsiCo doesn't mean we're going to go tell people to drink Pepsi. And that's true. Like, I've never seen a dietitian walk into a room and tell someone to drink oh, you should have three things of Pepsi. But what they're buying is the concept of moderation, which unfortunately, it sounds really nice. It sounds like, oh, all foods can fit. You can eat whatever you want as long as you moderate it. But we know that just physiologically, the human body does not moderate processed carbohydrates well. And all food manufacturers know that. The foods we eat, those processed foods, actually are able to override your brain. I mean, that's why most people listening this podcast, myself included, certainly have plowed through a whole bag of chips or eaten a bunch of cookies. Like, your brain cannot actually moderate those. And so it's a really terrible system. These big food companies are paying and funding our health experts, the dietitians, to help set these guidelines, which are keeping people sick. There's a lot of money there really is. I mean, there really is no money in making people well. If you kill somebody, then they die and you lose a consumer. If you heal them, they're healed. They're no longer a consumer. But keeping somebody perpetually diabetic, perpetually needing insulin, coming back for surgeries, that's the really only way to make money. And so it's really an unfortunate system. And I said on other podcasts that the dietitians, I worked in now 3 different hospitals, and about 60% of the dietitians I worked with are clinically obese, not overweight, obese. So I hear you. They're often these people, and I don't blame, I never, in my book, we talk about this a lot. I'm not blaming the patient or the consumer. We have been given terrible advice, and it's, our nation is paying for it with diabetes, and not just not just physical ailments like diabetes and heart disease, but also mental diseases like severe depression and anxiety.
Absolutely, and I agree with all of those things so much. And that's the problem is like a lot of dietitians are going in. I mean, I've listened to other podcasts and read other things, articles written by previous dietitians such as yourself, where they're like, okay, well, this person just had their leg amputated. They are staying in the hospital. They have severe diabetes, and they come in, and the hospital meal that is given to them has Coke and oatmeal and all of these things that they shouldn't be eating, and they say, okay, well, just dose with insulin. Well, that's a pretty lucrative business in itself, and that's not how it should work. You should be saying, okay, this is how we get this under control, not this is how we get this here, this is how you fit this in.
Yeah, so I always thought that a hospital should be a place where we're reducing inflammation and oxidation. Like like you said, and it is not uncommon. Unfortunately, diabetes, people, it's one of the highest causes of amputations. Much greater than like car accidents or anything like that. But what we're told, especially if you work in a hospital as like an acute care dietitian, you are there for their immediate needs. Like if they want to work on their diabetes, they can do that outside of the hospital setting, but you're basically there just to make sure they get enough protein and calories. And most of the time they're put on between a 75 and 90-gram carbohydrate diet. I mean, most people are surprised to hear that if you're a diabetic, you can order the hospital I worked at, you could order potato chips, a sandwich, and a mocha every meal if you want, as long as it fits in your carbohydrates. We'll just dose you with insulin. And that is the most disgusting system. I mean, it's keeping people perpetually sick. We know that carbohydrates are the only macronutrient that the human body does not need. What does that mean? We have to have protein. We have to have fat. You do not need any carbs to survive. And we have this whole patient population, diabetes specifically. I've used the analogy of, it's like setting your house on fire. If you're diabetic and you're taking carbohydrates, it's like setting your house on fire and then trying to dose it with insulin, this high-powered fire extinguisher. Like, I've proposed the radical solution of not setting your house on fire, and it's met with so much. I've talked to several dietitians, and I've even approached our medical director, but there's just so much resistance. It is not the standard of practice. And so you're not allowed. I'm not allowed. I was not allowed in the hospital to teach low carbohydrate diet education. And I'm very encouraged that that's changing in certain circles. But at least in most hospitals, it's not.
I love that. It is changing. I think there are people out there seeing the flaws in the system. I feel like they are so frowned upon, though. I know I just had, I was reading through a ketogenic forum, and this lady was like, who can I find in this state that will support the fact that I want to be on a low carbohydrate diet? I myself, I am super fortunate. My practitioner loves the fact that I'm a ketogenic person. Like when I told her that, she was like, oh my gosh, that's great. I love to hear that. And that was really refreshing coming from an industry where I would say, okay, well, I'm doing this. And they're like, oh, you can't do that. You can't live that way. So it is a breath of fresh air that there are people out there making an attempt to make changes in the medical system. But I feel like they're so overpowered by these big food and big pharma companies, especially now where we're in so much censorship where they're involved with that. We're talking about social media and all of these places where these companies are now funding the censorship of the people that want to say, hey, this worked for me.
Yeah, and we know that the current statement for the Academy of Nutrition, they've actually, come out with a statement, and then obviously we had the revisal of the nutrition guidelines, which didn't surprise me and probably won't surprise anyone listening to us that they didn't really change much. It's still terrible. But the Academy of Nutrition says that vegan and vegetarian diets are healthy and complete throughout your entire life cycle, meaning if you're an infant to an elderly, that's just fine. And there's a lot of, somebody from the board of Coca-Cola sits on the board. We know we have a lot of, there's 3 ethical vegans on that board. And so you're not going to see, I don't believe we're going to see a lot of systemic change. And what I mean by that is like our healthcare system change, just because there is so much money, in keeping people sick, like processed foods, not just processed foods, but also the top 3 companies that make like diabetic drugs. I mean, they reported earnings over $15 billion in 2019. And so they love what's going on. They love moderation. They love all these concepts that are keeping people sick. I think it's naive to think that we're actually going to see people wanting, to put the people's health before the profits of their their shareholders. And this is not to say that doctors and dietitians and nurses, I mean, we all go into this being like we want to help people. Like that is, I've never met somebody, and I've worked in, like I said, several different hospitals that doesn't genuinely care. But you get into a fundamentally flawed system and you have two choices. You get in line or you get out. And unfortunately, like, to become a dietitian is not a inexpensive endeavor. I have a 4-year degree, a very expensive internship, and then you're in this system and it's like, what do you do? So I feel the struggle, and it's incredibly, it's incredibly difficult. So I'm proud to be one of the people standing out and calling it out. And I know there's many others. I have over 20 testimonies in my book, doctors, dietitians, people that say, hey, we've had enough. We actually want to see people get better.
I love that. And at any point, are you like scared for this information you're putting out there, because it is powerful and it is something that has got some major backlash right now. And so being a provider and standing out and saying, no, the information is flawed, is that a scary thing?
It used to be. I used to be really afraid. I actually I'm really fortunate to work with one of the girls. Her name is Meg, that actually worked with Diana Rogers on the book The Sacred Cow, and we just connected into a fantastic human being. And there's so many different points throughout the book writing process that I just question, like, oh my gosh, if I put myself out there, what's going to happen? And pretty much kind of what I expected to happen has happened. I've gotten several emails from how do I put it? We'll call them zealous dietitians, saying some pretty nasty things. I've gotten people telling me I could get my license revoked. But when you heal, like my life completely changed 16 months ago, and I'm happy to go a little bit more into that. You can no longer be silent. I mean, I believe that complacency is complicity. I couldn't not tell the truth, and I think people get to a point where you just keep going, keep doing, because even if it's not working, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And throughout my entire life, especially into my early adolescence, it has been challenging. So it's like, at this point, I'm like, you know what, if you don't like me, I'm not for everybody. I'm outspoken. But I'm me, I'm authentic, I'm telling the truth. And I believe that, with this community, with this message, with this book, I believe we're going to help a lot of people. And that's all I want. My 2 life passions: I'm a long distance runner. I want to find out how long and how fast I can run. And I want to help other people. So, come what may, bring it on.
I love that. And that's kind of something that I have found in my own personal life, right? Your mess becomes your message. And my message is very similar to yours, where the shit hit the fan at multiple occasions, and I turned around and turned it into something I could use to help other people not make the mistakes I made. And I think it's a good thing that there are people like you and I and so many others that I've connected with that are out there trying to help people make the proper changes and breaking out of the regular medical system mold that is keeping people sick.
Absolutely. It's really interesting that I have a whole chapter in the book about where the nutrition guidelines came from. And we've all just kind of decided, like, this is how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have all these carbohydrates and supposed to have all this stuff, even though we're incredibly sick as a nation, and it's not just diabetes and heart disease. Like I talked about, and, mental illness, especially in our young people, is increasing exponentially. Deaths of despair, which are suicide and overdose, are increasing. Like, we have to make a change. I think we have to look and say, like, look, this is not working. And it's shocking to me that that idea just, and you know what, I'm not somebody that thinks that, like, if people aren't ready to change, or if they don't want to change, they want to keep eating whatever way they're eating, that's fine. You're an adult, that's your prerogative. But I think we need to provide them the information, right? Like, that's all I want to do. I want people to understand there's a different option. I had such a severe eating disorder when I was much younger. I was 5 feet tall. I was 12 years old. I was only 57 pounds. Like, I've dealt with severe, anxiety around food my entire life. And I just thought that's how it's supposed to be. I had no idea. No one ever said, hey, Michelle, you know what? If you align your diet with human physiology, it can really help heal your brain. Like, I just want people to know there's a different option.
Oh boy, I love that. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit then, because I know you said that 16 months ago your health was kind of failing you, and caused you to kind of reflect on what you were doing with your lifestyle and diet, and that's when you began to make changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 16 months ago, I had a major goal of qualifying for the Olympic trials in the marathon. So to do that, you have to run under 2 hours and 45 minutes for females, and my fastest time was 2 hours and 54 minutes. So I was about 10 minutes off. And so I was training really hard, and like I said earlier, I've been a very high carbohydrate athlete. And all of a sudden, I had just started working in an acute care hospital in Portland, and I wasn't really recovering well from workouts, and I thought like, something wrong with my iron, what's going on? And my body was just getting extra achy and sore. And I had some labs done and everything was fine. So I actually reached out to a few friends, a few sports dietitians, and was like, hey, y'all, I don't know what's going on. And interestingly, they both told me I needed to eat more and eat more often. At this time, I was eating, 4 to 5 times a day. They're like, oh, try eating 6 to 8 times a day. I was eating 300 grams of carbs. They suggested I eat 400 to 450. And so, as you can imagine, that did not go well. So I had been able to train at that point up to, 60, 70 miles a week. But I was going out for runs and I was breaking out in these cold sweats. I would come home and my muscles would just be on fire, like they hurt. My anxiety went through the roof for the first time in, I would say 2 or 3 years. I started having suicidal ideation. Like I was scared, and so talking with my wife, like, hey, I don't know what to do. And kind of the come to Jesus moment, I had a really bad day. It was just a kind of a terrible day at work. And I came home and I went to bed early, and I woke up at like 2 in the morning and my muscles just hurt. They felt like they were on fire. And I couldn't, I took some ibuprofen, and I was so anxious. So I actually drove to 7-Eleven. This is like 2:30 in the morning, got like 30 pounds of ice, came back, tried to quietly put it in the bathtub, and I'm sitting in an ice bath. It's like 3 in the morning. And my wife comes in and just sits by the bathtub and is like, maybe we should do something differently. And I just cried and I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm done running. At that time I was 36. I'm 37 now. And I was just like, you know what? Maybe I'm too old to run. I can't do it anymore. And so at that point, I kind of decided like, okay, well, if I'm not running, then why not back off on the carbs? Like I intuitively knew they didn't make me feel good, but they've just been ingrained in me for so many years that if you don't have all these carbs, you're not going to have energy and you're not going to be able to run. And so I just decided, look, I'm going to follow a ketogenic diet. That's what I decided. And I actually, in doing research for it, ended up coming across, the carnivore diet, which is an all meat diet. And I was like, this is nuts. Like, I can't get behind all meat. But I was curious, and that's what I would always encourage people. I feel like nowadays we're so polarized. If you hear something, like ask questions. And so I did some research. I looked up clinical trials on low carb, and I was just blown away by, there's a lot of case reports about reduced inflammation and recovery and anxiety. And then I came across Zach Bitter. Zach Bitter is the current 100-mile world record holder. So this guy's run the fastest 100-mile in the world. He's literally run, if he had run any of these, 25 miles, any of them individually would have qualified for the Boston Marathon, but he did it back to back to back to back. And he's a low carb athlete. And so it's like the wheels just started spinning in my head. And I was like, is this possible?
That's pretty cool. And that's Zach Bitter is one of the ones I was kind of looking at when I first started like getting into endurance sports and things like that. I was like, "Oh, this can be done." And that was a really great thing to have somebody put themselves out there and make you think that something's possible is a great thing.
Yeah, it was super exciting. I was so curious. I emailed him. I said, hey, like this is what's happening. I can't run at all, and I'm curious. And here you are running really well, and looking at the amount of carbohydrates he was eating. He was literally eating less carbohydrates in a week than my hospital patients were eating in a day, and myself as well. And to me just about his nutrition philosophy and how he found that as a low carbohydrate athlete, he was able to burn fat for fuel. So, he was able to have really steady, consistent energy. And then he could actually leverage carbohydrates. So he could actually use them for really high intensity workouts for races, as opposed to, kind of riding that blood sugar spike and crash all the time. So I was fascinated. I was just very interested initially, but I had no intention of going back into serious training. I mean, I was, like I said, I was experiencing severe muscle pain and anxiety. And so, if I wasn't going to run anymore, I just decided I would follow, a very high meat diet for 30 days. I said, you know what, this will be good. My body's clearly shot. I'm, stressed. I'm going to do this and just see how it goes. My only goal was really, I want my muscles to stop hurting. Because like I said, I was literally waking up in the middle of the night with like searing muscle pain. And my wife was was not on board, to her credit, she's known me for a very long time. And I have a history of an eating disorder. And so she felt like a all meat, high fat, zero carb diet was a terrible idea, even for a short period of time. And so we actually thought about it quite a bit. And finally, she was just like, you know what? You're an adult. Do whatever you want. This is not going to work. And yeah. And so it was definitely an interesting transition, going from eating oatmeal and bagels and bananas to, showing up at work with a pound of ground beef and butter. All the dietitians are eating, oatmeal. They're like, oh, that's so different. But interestingly, I really intuitively from the very beginning, I felt, it felt really good. I mean, I noticed right away that my energy was better. Like I'd eat a meal and I just stare at the clock. I was always hungry and I could eat a meal and go hours without needing to eat again. And I would say by about the second week, like my muscle pain was gone. And I kind of attributed that to just, okay, well, I'm not running. So surely, I was really surprised how steady my energy was. I didn't have a whole lot of symptoms of, like that transition, that keto flu. I did have a really bad headache on one of the days. But yeah, the third week, actually, my wife asked me to come sit with her. She was like, hey, can you come chat with me for a minute? And I came and sat with her and she grabbed my hand and was like, you know what? I don't know if I like this way of eating yet, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. Like, we were both floored. Like I wasn't anxious. I was happy. I was calm. I could sleep through the night. And that's when, like I think both of the wheels in our head were turning. Like we immediately started, listening to podcasts, pulling up clinical trials, doing research. And very honestly, for about a month or so, I was pretty angry. Like I was angry at our medical system. I was angry, I'm like, here I am in this system. And my whole life I've been told I need all these carbohydrates. And I was just thought for the rest of my life, I was going to have racing thoughts about food and anxiety and obsession and depression. And within weeks of getting rid of all these carbohydrates and just eating meat and fat, I was fine. I felt normal for the first time in my life. And so, yeah, it was shocking. Like I honestly, when I say it out loud, it almost seems surreal. And I feel like if you haven't experienced it, it almost sounds kind of hokey, like, oh, no way, it's something this simple. But, I've had the privilege too of interviewing so many people for my book and my YouTube channel. Yeah, you're going to hear a similar story. Like our body has a tremendous capacity to heal once we provide it with the right nutrients and we remove a lot of those, carbohydrates and processed carbohydrates.
And wow, your story here is so it's uncanny, like how similar it is to mine because the same thing, like I had tried everything else. I mean, I've done the GAPS diet, I've been paleo, I've done AIP, I've done Whole30, I've tried like everything, right? And they're all great. All of those things are a great thing. But I was in a health crisis myself due to overtraining and extreme dieting with bodybuilding. That's a whole different story, but I literally did exactly what you did. I was looking at what was laid out in front of me and I was like, I haven't tried carnivore.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Saladino and I was like, this guy's jacked. And then also the Zach Bitter thing. And I was like, you know what? I don't need this. I don't need to be eating sweet potato. I don't need to be eating these things. And I need a reset. My system is overwhelmed. And I start really researching and finding out that I can get all the vitamins and minerals and everything that I need from meat. And that's when I like looked at my husband and I was like, I'm going to do carnivore. And he's like, really? Are you kidding? And I literally went down the street, bought a 175-pound box of grass-fed beef. And I was like, I'm doing this. Bone broth, meat. And that's what I was eating was, bacon. And at first I didn't even eat eggs. It was all straight meat. And I was like, I am just going to do this for 30 days and see what happens, just similar to you. And after 30 days, I was like, I feel freaking amazing. So then that turned into 40, with 50, 60, and I kept going with it until about Christmas time. And at that time, I was like, I've been on this a while. I can start pulling things back in. And I did. And I watched as I went back to my sweet potato and broccoli and chicken. I watched myself kind of fall back into the same pattern. And that's by February, I was like, okay, I need to make a change. I don't want it to be as extreme as carnivore, but I think that carbohydrates are a common denominator here. And that really got my wheels spinning. So it's funny that you use 30 days because that's exactly what I ended up doing. I was like, listen, commit to something for 30 days and see what changes happen.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think that reset is what my body needed. I think my body was just so, you know, just I needed the nutrients. And people, there's this misconception around protein, like, oh, we can get all the protein we need from, beans and peas. And meat is so much more than protein. Obviously it's an excellent source of protein, but beyond that, things that I think my body really needed. I needed the iron, I needed the zinc, I needed the carnitine and the carnosine and the taurine, all those cofactors that are not found in the plant kingdom at all in certain situations like B12, or if they are, they're very not very bioavailable, meaning your body can't utilize or digest them well. And so when I did that, and also you're removing the anti-nutrients, plants have anti-nutrients. Those are things that can bind to like calcium and iron, things like phytic acid, which is in seeds and nuts, or, lectins. So I think just giving my body that break and that time was incredible. It was a complete reset. And, for me, as I started to feel better, it was around the third week or so. My wife loves to read, loves her solitude, and I was around more because I wasn't I wasn't running. And so she just kind of casually like mentioned like, yeah, maybe you should go for a run. You should go, try running. And I kind of freaked out a little bit because I had kind of decided like, look, I'm not going to run anymore. Like I can't, I had associated it in my mind now with just this physical pain and this, I had spent my entire adolescence and adulthood trying to qualify for the trials, and it was this failure. It wasn't going to happen. And so having her suggest like, hey, why don't you go for a run? I was like, oh my God, I don't know. But then it was kind of like, you know what? Why don't I drop the ego? Why don't I just go jog a mile or two? Because I was still thinking like, I haven't eaten any carbs in at that point almost a month. So I'm not going to be able to run. So I'll go, putz around the block and it'll be fine. And I left the house and I came back an hour later. Like I felt fine. And that's when the wheels really started to turn in my head. And it was almost just like at that moment, I remember coming back from that run and just like starting to dream again. Like, oh my God, what can I do? Can I run like this again? And so my wife is thinking like that I was going to be a very recreational runner now, and we'd go to a trail. And then I said, how about I run an ultra marathon? Well, now forget this 26-mile business. How about 50 miles? So we're once again a little less than enthusiastic about that idea initially, but we agreed. We said, hey, look, I said, why don't I reach back out to Zach, and if he's willing to coach me, why don't we set a plan and give it a few months, and at that point we'll pick a race. I'll pick a race after that. So, and it went great. I got stronger every week. I could tell. I used to go for long runs when I was a high carb athlete, and I'd come back and I'd just be sore and cranky the rest of the day. And now I come home and I can help with yard work. And I kind of jokingly say like, oh, maybe I'm too sore for yard work. Definitely my favorite thing. But it's changed everything. Like my recovery is better. My energy is better. My sleep is better. Yeah. And so, obviously we're filming this the very beginning of 2021. But during 2020, I'd intended to run a 50-mile race in May, and that was canceled, as well as a race I had set up in October was canceled. But I just, Zach is an amazing human too. He's a really, really good athlete, but he's just this fantastic human, his fantastic coach. He kept adjusting, and we finally found a 6-hour race that happened. November 7th was my first ultra marathon. And it's kind of funny. We were looking back on it from the time he started working with me to the time I actually got to race was almost a full year. Normally it's like 4 months or 6 months, but COVID just kept canceling my races. And it went great. I won the race. Over a 6 hour period, I ran, it was 44.63 miles, so 8:04 pace. And so I have a picture on my Instagram that, like, when we were done, I was, you're cold, you're tired. There was kind of like this little building behind where the race was. And I was like, can I go change? Can I get out of there? And I just started bawling. And my wife took a picture and I was like, oh my God, throw that away. We can't post that. And she's like, that is the most beautiful show of emotion. Like, and it's true. I look back on it now and it was just like everything that I had went through had kind of come full circle. It's like, hey, I went from, you can't run a mile without getting sick, and you're anxious and you're depressed, and you're engaging in some really unhealthy coping mechanisms, to you're happy, and you have a job you like, you've written a book, and you just ran 44 miles. So
Mhm.
it's really exciting. And it's now my goal too, just to give people hope, because
Mhm.
if thing these people in our nation need right now, it's hope. We need something to look forward to. We need to believe change is possible in our health, in our physical and mental health. And I hope to be somebody who can continue to voice that message.
I love that so much. So you kind of talked a little bit about training as a low carb athlete. I want to dissect that a little because that's actually something I've discovered has been the most fun part about it is I'm a ketogenic athlete, and the changes that can be made, like for your run, for example, when you did your ultra, I'm assuming you probably didn't need to stop and eat or eat on the go or anything like that because you're so fat adapted, you have so much energy already stored in your body.
Yeah, and once again, I'm coming from a marathon background, to where you don't really stop in marathons. Like, I've never run. I mean, maybe if you have like an emergency and you have to go to the bathroom, you have to tie your shoe. But I was kind of floored in the ultra. Like, people would like stop and hang out. My wife ended up volunteering. That was the only way she could get into the race, because they weren't letting people in with COVID. And she's like, yeah, people would stop for like 20 minutes and have a sandwich. And I'm like, what? Why? You're like losing 20 minutes. Um, and I know it's different as you go longer and longer, but yeah, no, I worked, I've done some work with a company called S Fuels. It's the company that Zach uses as well. It's a low carbohydrate drink. It's fantastic stuff. And I use their products to train and race with, very high in electrolytes and glutamine, has some healthy fats and some protein, very low in carbohydrates. And I used that for my 6 hour race. I never stopped. I just drank the S Fuels. I did have little tiny balls of sourdough that I had, gosh, I think every like 3 or 4 of them. But still, I mean, the whole race, I'm sure I consumed, oof, I don't know, 60, probably 75 grams of carbs for 6 hours. I don't know, around there.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I never, I did not stop during the race.
Yeah, it was kind of funny.
You know?
Yeah, and I get that because it was kind of funny when I did my distance cycling race, there was people like pounding stuff while they were riding, like eating granola bars, things like that. And everybody that I was with actually wanted to stop because I ended up picking up some random people that I didn't even know, and we all started riding together. And they wanted to stop and eat like every single aid station, which is like every 10 miles basically. And I was thinking, okay, well, we're kind of wasting time here. Let's get going. And they kept going, you don't need to eat. And I was like, no, I'm fine. Like, I feel good. And it was 10 hours. And similar to you, I think I had two maybe Lara bars the whole time. And that's just because I knew they would set right. And there's a lot of fat and stuff in those too. So I was like, sweet, I'll do that. And so I think that was probably under 60 grams of carbs for the whole race. Um, and I felt great. I had energy. I didn't feel weighed down or like weird. You know how you eat a ton of sugar and then you're kind of sick to your stomach, especially when you're performing at a high level. And I was like, okay, this is a game changer.
Yeah, and people like you referenced, if you are a very high carbohydrate athlete, I mean, you really set your body up to where you have to eat every, 30 to 40 minutes, or you will have that blood sugar crash. I've been there, and it's a horrible feeling in a marathon where you're just like dizzy, shaky, or your legs just lock up, like you literally are, running out of glucose, or your body can't access your stored body fat, right? We all have plenty of stored body fat, even super lean people. It's just when you're taking in a lot of carbohydrates and you're training your body to eat a lot of carbohydrates, you're activating insulin. What does insulin do? Insulin's a hormone that suppresses your body's ability to burn fat. And so if you're basically, I mean, it's brilliant marketing for like goos and gels and things, because it's like if you're taking the product, you're going to have to keep taking it because you're not going to be able to burn fat. And so that was actually a really exciting thing for me. I did in my training, I did a 4 hour run one day. So I ran, it was a little almost 29 miles. And the next day, I had to come back and run 16 miles fast. And I tell you what, like, I was sore. Like, I did not want to run 16 miles fast, but I did it really well and I did it fasted. And I knew at that point, I knew that during my 6 hour run, I was not going to run out of fuel. Like that was not going to be a problem. There would be a point in the race. And Zach and I talked about this quite a bit where I was going to hurt, you're running 6 hours, you're going to have some muscle fatigue, but if you can deal with that, if you can just keep pressing, you're not going to run out of fuel. You're not going to be sick, dizzy, nauseous. And it was almost kind of exciting. I think it was probably around a little after the marathon point that I kind of hit that pain plateau where it wasn't getting any better, but it wasn't really getting any worse. And I was like, oh, good. I just got to keep going. 2.5 hours, just keep moving, but it's great. It felt so good to be confident and to know like, man, I got this. I can do this. Like, as long as I'm physically strong enough to do this, I'm mentally tough enough to do this, and my body is trained and fat adapted enough to where I'm going to be fine. And so that's really exciting. And that gives me hope. And, once again, that whole continuing to dream, like, well, what can I do? If I can run 6 hours, and I, I just scheduled we just scheduled a race, Zach and I. So I was set up to do 100K in April, but that got postponed. So I have a new running goal. So I'm excited for that too.
That's awesome. So something that intrigues me, and we don't have to dive into it too deep because everybody else may not be interested in it, but heart rate zones. So when you're training, like where do you put are you doing like a more of a maffetone pace, or are you staying in that aerobic capacity, or are you going beyond it? And then what does nutrition look like when you go beyond that threshold a little bit?
And so I do, I have a watch that can get the heart rate on the watch. I've worn chest straps in the past, and I know those are probably quite a bit more accurate, but I can't, it doesn't feel good on me. But I've always been someone who's pretty good at pacing, like even around like a track and stuff. And so I have a pretty good idea of how I feel. Like we don't really, like I can track my heart rate on my watch, but how we do our training is like really easy days. It's like a 2 to 3 effort out of a 10, right? And then maybe like a tempo run would be like a 6 to 7 out of 10, and repeats will be like 9 to 10 out of 10. And so certainly for longer easy days, I'm going to be doing those. I almost always have the SF Fuels the Train product, because it's just 3 grams of carbs, really low, just has the electrolytes on fat and protein. I'll have that before because my goal is to train and teach my body to utilize fat for fuel. And that's certainly really effective at those lower heart rates. So even if I'm going, I would say a 4 to 5 effort, I'm still, it's either fasted or that just the SS Fuels Train product, because I'm still going to be able to burn fat for fuel. Now, if I'm going, I'd say over about 2 hours, or if it's a more intense run, then about 40 to 45 minutes into the run, that's when, I feel like, your glute channel's open. You're really able to start receiving a lot of carbohydrates without that insulin response. So that's when I'd have their race product. That product has 15 grams of carbs. And that, so that's when I would have a little bit more carbohydrates. And then, from day to day, my carbohydrate intake doesn't shift a whole lot. Certainly when I'm in periods of, when my mileage gets higher, I find, I do a little bit better with a little higher carbohydrate intake. But yeah, I mean, I'm not too technical. I know some people get really, really excited and nerdy about all the paces and stuff, but half the time I'll just go out the door with my Timex if it's an easy run, because I know about what it's going to take, and I'm a little old school. So
I love it. I tend to nerd out and get like super crazy in-depth charts and things, and like I'm really bad at, but it's also fun to learn like how your body responds to certain things. Like I know if I'm breaking that threshold and I'm up in these higher heart rates, and I don't have carbs on board, but then I watch my blood sugar elevate, I know that I want to take it a little easier on my body and pull in just enough to take care of that. And then when I'm done with my workout, it's already used and gone, and it doesn't cause any problems. So, yeah, anyway, it's really interesting how everybody's training differs. So I did want to touch on that.
What I definitely had to get used to too is just running a little, like taking easy days very easy. As a marathon, when I was training as a marathon runner, like you very rarely would ever go under 8 minute. I mean, you never went above 8 minute pace, even on an easy run. Like you were running with women, it'd be a recovery day, and you might be doing 7:15 to 7:30. And I noticed, when I first started, and doing a very low carb, trying to hit those faster paces was really hard. And so I really had to give my body time to adjust. And, Zach also reminded me, like, hey, look, switching to a low carb diet, it's a great thing in the long term, but it's still a stress on your body. So you have to, like, we're going to really back up. So, for me, it was really humbling to, to drop the pace by a couple minutes, and see a grandpa jogging by you. But just really, really letting my body recover well. And so when it was time, like, hey, you know what, we're doing a 4 hour faster run. Like when you take those recovery days seriously, it allowed me to hit the harder workouts hard and those longer workouts. So yeah, no, it went really well, but it was definitely a little bit of an adjustment.
For sure, for sure. So let's talk about your book.
Oh,
It's getting ready to come out pretty soon
so
here, right?
what a process. Anybody who wants to write a book, you send me a message. I wish some things I wish to tell me. Also, don't promise a time frame. It's amazing how long the edits and all that stuff takes. But yeah, so the book is called The Dietitian's Dilemma because that's what I had. All of a sudden I had this information that was life-saving and life-changing. And the more research I did, I was like, why are we doing this for our diabetics? Why aren't we advocating for more protein for our patients with sarcopenia? And I was told, like, we're not going to do this, we can't do this, you need to be quiet, you need to stay in your lane. And so my dilemma was, what do I do? Do I continue to practice or do I speak out? And clearly, I've chosen to speak out. So it's my story. It's the book starts with my story, my history of having a severe eating disorder, and kind of my life story of how I became a dietitian, what we discussed earlier, losing my health and getting it back. And then I'm really fortunate to have the foreword written by Dr. Nevada Gray. She's become an incredible friend and mentor. I cannot say enough about her help and her advocacy. Throughout the entire book, I worked with health coach Kate to use her graphics. I think they're beautiful and fantastic and really easy to read and understand. One of my coworkers I worked with at Scratch Meats is also an artist. His name is Ash, and he did some of the really beautiful graphic design in the book. But it goes through disease states I thought I could speak really well about. So diabetes, mental illness, sarcopenia, heart disease, and eating disorders. And it just, I ask a lot of questions. What do you think of this? Is this the best way to do this? I'm going to present clinical trials. There's over 180 clinical trials in the book. But I also wanted it to be really easy to read. And I put in a lot of stories from my own experience working in the hospital. I've got over 20 testimonies in there. And then, I sometimes think you read a book and then you're like, okay, now what do I do? So there's a getting started chapter. And I also wanted to have several people in the book that are health coaches and doctors and, that are ready to work with people getting started. And then I've actually had a lot of people reach out and ask me, like, what do you do for running? How do you run? What do you eat to run? So I went ahead and put a chapter in there on, what I do to run. And so, yeah, I'm just hoping it gets people excited, gets more conversation going. I'm thrilled that I got a book cover review from Dr. Ben Bickman. Also Dr. Westman, Eric Westman's writing a review, Jimmy Moore. So just really, really excited. And it will be on Amazon. All things going well with the formatter, fingers crossed, January 31st. So a few weeks from when we're filming this. So I'm really excited.
So close, so close. This
No,
is
I can see that it's fine. It's like, I've read it so many times now. Anyone who's writing a book will tell you writing is beautiful and wonderful, and editing is a nightmare. But it's almost over. So no, the whole process has been really exciting. I've always wanted to write a book, and losing a lot of my hours in 2020 gave me the ability to have more time. And now I've completely shifted, and I'm out of the medical field, so I've got more time and doing more fun things. So
plus getting to connect with so many amazing people along the journey. That's so awesome as well. Like talking with other people and seeing other people's stories is always a lot of fun.
oh, it's so amazing. And you know what I tell people, like, when I was losing my health, like when I was scared and I felt alone, I reached out to a few people in the community, specifically Sarah Kleiner, Carnivore Yogi, Ade Fox, the Black Carnivore, Keto Marathoner, Kristen. And every single one of those women like reached back out to me and was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Hey, you're not alone. And I mean, I just remember thinking like, you guys look happy and healthy and I'm not happy and healthy. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am. Like, I feel like this book is like my gift of gratitude back to the community. Like because of this community, because of all these amazing humans, because of Robert Sykes and because of, Mary Roberts and all these amazing humans, I'm, I'm, I'm healthy. I'm a healthy human and I can give back. And so I just hope and pray that other people will read this and get excited and that we can just keep this movement going because like I said before, like my God, the human body, I put it through so much. And the fact that I'm able to not only just I feel like it would be just a miracle just for my muscles not to hurt and for me not to have anxiety. Like that would be incredible. And that is incredible. But beyond that, to be able to heal and to be able to train to be an endurance runner again, like I'm over the moon. So I'm really grateful.
Well, I'm really excited for you. This is going to be a great new adventure when this book comes out. I'm sure that you're going to connect with so many more people on every level. So that's so exciting. If my listeners want to go find you, where do they do that at?
Yeah, so I'm definitely most active on Instagram. You can find me, it's all one word at run, eat, meet, repeat. So all spelled out, run, eat, meet, repeat. Kind of the story of my life. I do have my professional website out now. So the dietitiansdilemma.net. And that has, if you actually go to that, I do have a link where you can read the first page of the book. You can read the introduction. And hopefully within the next couple of weeks, there will be a link where you can buy it on Amazon. So I'm really excited about that. I am on Twitter, Michelle Hurn RD. I don't argue or engage, so you're welcome to read my post. But yeah, if you want to engage, you definitely hit me up on Instagram or shoot me an email from my website.
I love that. And I'll put all your information in the show notes. And when your book releases, I will make sure and share that all over as well, because I think it's going to be a great thing for people to read and learn about, even if they're not interested in going that avenue. It just opens some thought processes and doors that maybe wouldn't have been open before if they hadn't read about it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think regardless of what you end up wanting to do, I think it's good to kind of understand your options, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michelle, it has been a pleasure and I love what you're doing. And I'm so happy that you're getting stuff out there in the public. And thank you so, so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.